Do you get sensitive about the fact that people say he'll never take a serious?
There was a time when The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson was the safest stage in America. A polished desk, a smiling host, a nation watching, trusting that everything would go exactly as planned. But behind that calm smile, chaos was always just one drink away. Over 3 decades on late-night television, Johnny Carson faced moments so wild, so uncomfortable, and so unpredictable that even a master of live TV struggled to keep control. These weren't nervous rookies or unknown guests. These were Hollywood legends, Oscar winners, cultural icons, and some of them walked through that curtain completely drunk. Tonight, we're diving into the most out-of-control, jaw-dropping drunken guest moments in Tonight Show history, moments that made audiences laugh nervously, moments that made producers panic, and moments so bad they quietly changed booking rules forever. We start with a man who defined cool, and then slowly watched it slip away. Part 1, Dean Martin. When cool became a coin toss. When Dean Martin stepped onto the Tonight Show stage, the audience already knew something was off. He didn't come out empty-handed. He came out holding a drink. At first, it felt harmless. Dean Martin was supposed to be loose, smooth, a little tipsy. That was part of the charm. But the moment he sat down across from Johnny Carson, the cracks started to show. His words slurred. His punchlines missed their mark. Simple setups turned into confusion. Dean stumbled through the stories that never landed, greeting Johnny like they'd never met before, drifting off mid-sentence as if the thought had vanished right out of his head. The audience laughed at first because that's what audiences do, but slowly the laughter thinned. Johnny, ever the professional, adjusted on the fly. He asked easy questions, soft questions, the kind Dean could answer half asleep. But Dean didn't play along. He interrupted Johnny mid-sentence. He mixed up movie titles. He forgot what film he was even there to promote. At one point, he simply stopped talking, then wandered toward the band as if the cameras weren't rolling. What once looked effortless on Dean's own variety show suddenly felt shaky under Johnny's tighter format. The magic appeared in flashes, but each appearance became a gamble. Would the legend show up, or the chaos? Behind the scenes, producers quietly started adjusting schedules whenever Dean Martin's name appeared. They knew his segments could stall, derail, or crash so hard they'd have no choice but to cut to commercial without warning. Dean Martin was still a star, still charming, still iconic, but every visit became a risky coin toss between nostalgia and total meltdown. And this was only the beginning. If there was one man America trusted to never lose control on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, it was Ed McMahon. Ed wasn't just a guest, he was the backbone. Johnny Carson's steady right hand, the man who never slipped until one unforgettable night when everything went sideways. It started small, almost harmless. Ed was introducing Joan Embry from the San Diego Zoo, a familiar segment the audience had seen countless times. But something was off immediately. His timing lagged. His words dragged. His focus drifted. Then he got stuck, not on the animals, not on the segment, but on one tiny detail. How many years had Joan been coming on the show? 7, 8, 9? Ed latched onto the number like it was the most important question of his life. He argued with Johnny about it, insisting he was right, then contradicting himself seconds later. Johnny tried gently nudging the conversation forward, smiling, joking, doing everything he could to steer things back on track. But Ed couldn't let it go. he spiraled into slurred explanations, half-formed thoughts and rambling stories about baby lions that made absolutely no sense. One moment he sounded defensive, the next strangely emotional, almost sentimental. You could see it on Johnny's face, that rare flicker of concern. Ed kept cutting off Joan's introduction, jumping in at the wrong moments, forgetting what he just said seconds earlier. Johnny teased him lightly, hinting he might need a nap, trying to snap him out of it without embarrassing him on national television. It didn't work. Finally, Johnny made a split-second decision. He waved Joan out early, rushing the segment forward just to save what little structure remained. It was damage control in real time. For longtime viewers, this wasn't funny chaos. It was unsettling. Because if Ed McMahon could unravel on live TV, then anything could happen. That night became one of the few times Johnny Carson visibly struggled to keep his own show from drifting off the rails. The smoothest partnership in late-night history had cracked. If only for a few minutes, and the audience never forgot it. But the discomfort was about to get much worse. Because the next guest didn't just ramble, he collapsed completely. By the time Truman Capote walked onto the Tonight Show stage in 1980, something felt wrong instantly. This wasn't playful drunkenness. This wasn't awkward humor. This was a collapse happening in real time. Capote shuffled toward the guest's chair, moving slowly, unsteadily, leaning against Johnny's desk just to stay upright. His eyes were glassy, his speech already slurred before the interview even began. Johnny greeted him gently, carefully, as if hoping this wouldn't turn into what everyone in the studio was already fearing. It did. Capote could barely form complete sentences. His words tangled together, dissolving into mumbled fragments no one could follow. When Johnny tried to ask about writing, Capote drifted into rambling stories that went nowhere. One thought started, vanished, then reappeared as something else entirely. The audience didn't laugh, they froze. This was the man who wrote In Cold Blood, one of America's most celebrated literary voices, and now he couldn't hold on to a single idea long enough to finish it. Johnny tried grounding him with simple questions, soft questions, human questions. Capote insisted he felt perfect. Then came the moment that shocked everyone in the room. Out of nowhere, Capote turned to Ed McMahon and asked, completely serious, if he could sit in his lap. Nervous laughter rippled through the studio. Johnny jumped in immediately, trying to defuse the moment before it exploded. Capote reached for a glass of water, missed his mouth entirely, and spilled it down the front of his shirt. Still, he didn't notice. 7 agonizing minutes passed like an hour. This wasn't funny anymore. This wasn't entertaining. This was painful. Johnny made the call, an early commercial break. When the show returned, Johnny wrapped the segment in barely 2 minutes, doing everything he could to end it with dignity. Capote slowly shuffled back behind the curtain. That was the last time Truman Capote ever appeared on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. The clip became infamous, a Pulitzer Prize-level talent unraveling on national television, unable to hold himself together. It wasn't scandal, it was tragedy. And it sent a quiet message through Hollywood. Even legends weren't safe from live TV. But the chaos wasn't done yet, because the next guest didn't just lose control. She detonated the entire set. When Shelley Winters burst through the curtain in 1974, there was no easing into chaos. It exploded instantly. She came out loud, fast, and unstoppable, cutting Johnny Carson off before he could even finish welcoming her. From the first second, she dominated the couch, talking over Johnny, over the other guests, over everyone. There were 2 other people sitting there that night. You wouldn't have known it. Every question Johnny tried to ask simply bounced right off her. She ignored the flow of the show completely, launching into random stories about people no one recognized, switching topics without warning, laughing at her own tangents. Then things crossed a line. A young actor was on the couch promoting his very first major film, the biggest night of his career. Shelley turned toward him, grabbed his knee, and began tearing his movie apart right to his face. She called it boring. She mocked his acting. She laughed like it was all just a joke. The actor froze, wearing that tight, forced smile people use when they don't know how to escape. Johnny tried stepping in, defending him, attempting to redirect the conversation. Shelley didn't listen. Then she noticed something else, Johnny's note cards. Without hesitation, she leaned forward, snatched the entire stack from his hands, and hurled them behind her over the couch like trash. The cards scattered across the floor. The audience gasped. Johnny sat there completely speechless. No guest had ever done that before. Shelley didn't even slow down. She kept talking, laughing, ranting as if nothing had happened. After 12 exhausting minutes, Johnny finally looked into the camera and calmly announced an early commercial break. The damage was done. Backstage, NBC producers made a decision, quietly, firmly, and without debate. Shelley Winters was done. She was officially blacklisted from The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Her agents were told she wasn't welcome back. The ban lasted nearly 3 years. When she was finally allowed to return, it came with conditions, serious conditions. Show up sober, treat fellow guests with respect. That night became legend, not because it was funny, but because it proved something chilling. Even Johnny Carson couldn't always control the room. And the next guest, he didn't just derail the interview, he took over the entire show. By the mid-1970s, Orson Welles had already built a reputation for being unpredictable, brilliant, commanding, and often already drinking before the cameras rolled. His 1975 appearance on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson became something else entirely. Backstage, crew members watched him down multiple bottles of wine before stepping onto the stage. When he finally emerged under the studio lights, it was clear he was tipsy, slightly off balance, but still unmistakably Orson Welles. The booming voice, the commanding presence, the confidence of a man who knew he owned every room he entered. Johnny barely managed to ask one question. That's all it took. Orson launched into a non-stop monologue that would last 14 straight minutes. At first, it was mesmerizing. He dove into Shakespeare with passion and depth, delivering insights that felt electric. The audience leaned in. Johnny listened, nodding, letting it breathe. Then the monologue drifted from Shakespeare to theater history, to his own career, to a Hungarian director no one in the room had ever heard of. And then came the moment that turned brilliance into madness. Orson began quoting Hamlet. 3 lines in, he forgot the text entirely and simply made up new Shakespearean dialogue on the spot. He delivered it with such conviction that half the audience likely believed it was real. Johnny sat there powerless, glancing at the camera with the look that said everything. I've lost control of my own show. For 14 uninterrupted minutes, Orson never paused, not for laughter, not for breath, not even for Johnny. He steamrolled through ideas, memories, rants, and invented lines like a one-man tornado on live television. And yet, no one could look away, because even drunk, even rambling, Orson Welles commanded the room. There was no structure, no rhythm, just raw, chaotic genius. And despite it all, Johnny kept inviting him back, because some guests weren't just entertaining. They were unforgettable. But the next name on the list, Johnny didn't even let him sit down. Some guests lost control on Johnny Carson's stage. Oliver Reed never even got the chance. By 1973, Reed had become infamous across Hollywood, not just for his talent, but for what happened when alcohol entered the picture. Other talk shows had already paid the price. Drunken rants, open insults, threats to strip on live television, demands for booze mid-interview, explosive behavior that crews couldn't contain. NBC executives were nervous, very nervous. Before Reed was scheduled to appear on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, network executives gathered tapes from his past appearances. They showed Johnny exactly what he'd done elsewhere. Johnny watched carefully, and when the tape ended, he didn't hesitate. No. That was it. Johnny Carson flat out refused to put Oliver Reed on live television. No delays, no second chances, no, let's see how it goes. The decision was made before the cameras ever rolled. Reed never appeared on The Tonight Show during Johnny's entire 30-year run. Afterward, Oliver Reed mocked Carson publicly, calling him scared, uptight, afraid of real chaos, but Johnny didn't respond. He didn't need to. He'd already seen enough over the years to know one thing for certain. Live television has limits. Johnny had saved guests from embarrassment. He'd rescued interviews mid-crash. He'd smiled through moments that should have derailed the entire show. But Oliver Reed wasn't a gamble. He was an explosion waiting for a match. And Johnny Carson wasn't willing to light it. But chaos still found a way, because the next guest did make it to the couch. And what happened next was equal parts brilliance and breakdown. When Peter O'Toole showed up on The Tonight Show in 1978, people backstage said the same thing. He'd been drinking all afternoon, not a small sip, not a casual cocktail, the kind of drinking that clings to a person, the kind you can almost smell before they even sit down. Johnny Carson opened the interview with the obvious safe entry point, Lawrence of Arabia, but Peter O'Toole didn't answer. He ignored the question completely and launched into a fiery lecture about acting. Not a ramble at first, a lecture, passionate, intense, brilliant. For a moment, you could feel the room lock in. This was the genius. Then the shift hit. It was like watching the lights flicker. His thoughts began unraveling. A sentence would start sharp, then loop into confusion, then snap back into clarity for a line so intelligent it made the audience lean forward again. Brilliance, confusion, brilliance, confusion. Whiplash. Johnny tried to ride the wave, laughing, nudging, guiding, but O'Toole kept swerving out of every lane Johnny tried to place him in. And then came one of the strangest moments of the night. Peter reached over, grabbed Johnny's pen off the desk, held it up like a sword, and challenged Johnny Carson to a fencing match right there on live TV. Johnny laughed, played along, but you could see it. He was working hard to keep the chaos charming instead of catastrophic. Then O'Toole pivoted again. He started spilling wild drinking tales about Richard Harris. Stories that felt like they probably shouldn't have been told on television at all. But the crowd couldn't look away. It was messy. It was magnetic. Pure chaos with a wink. That's what made Peter O'Toole so dangerous on that couch, even when he was spiraling he was still more captivating than most guests who showed up perfectly sober. Johnny survived the segment. The audience survived it too. But the next entry on this list, the audience didn't even know if what they were watching was acting or the real thing. By the time Foster Brooks sat down on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, the audience thought they knew exactly what they were getting. Slurred words, wobbly timing, forgotten names. That was the character. Foster Brooks made a career out of playing the lovable drunk, and audiences adored him for it. Every pause, every stumble, every mangled sentence was supposed to be part of the joke. But on at least one Tonight Show appearance, something shifted. Backstage, staff later admitted the truth quietly. Brooks liked to have a drink or two before going on. Just enough, he said, to get into character. Most nights, it worked. This night, it didn't. As the interview went on, the rhythm started slipping. The pauses and stretched too long. The punchlines landed late. The slur didn't feel rehearsed anymore. The line between performance and reality blurred. Johnny Carson clocked it instantly. Without calling attention to it, he slipped into rescue mode. He softened his questions. He filled in space. He laughed at moments that weren't quite jokes yet, turning near misses into safe laughs. To the audience at home, it still looked like controlled chaos. Behind the desk, Johnny was carrying the entire segment. Brooks lost his place more than once, circling back to bits he'd already done, stumbling over names he normally nailed. The carefully choreographed drunk routine cracked just enough for people in the studio to realize something was wrong. Afterward, crew members said it plainly. He wasn't just playing drunk. He was drunk. The audience never fully knew where the act ended and reality began, but the staff did. And Johnny did. That night became a textbook example of why Carson was the best in the business. He protected his guests, protected the show, and got everyone safely through it without humiliation. But not every guest could be saved. The next one didn't just blur lines. He turned the entire studio into a pressure cooker. Some Tonight Show moments are remembered for laughter. This one was remembered for the feeling that something might explode at any second. Robert Blake had made a handful of tense appearances over the years, but one visit stood out above the rest. According to multiple staffers, there had been heavy backstage drinking, enough to give him a dangerous kind of confidence. The moment he walked through the curtain, the audience cheered, expecting that familiar tough guy swagger. But the second he sat down, the mood changed. His leg bounced. His fingers tapped. His eyes darted around the room like he was daring someone to challenge him. Johnny tried starting with a harmless question, the kind that usually settles a guest in, something simple about Blake's latest project. Blake ignored it. Instead, he launched into a rant about Hollywood phoniness, not a witty jab, not a playful complaint, a rant. He stepped on Johnny's questions, cutting him off again and again, refusing to follow the usual Tonight Show rhythm. Johnny nudged him toward the movie plug, the entire reason he was booked. Blake swerved away from it like it disgusted him. 1 second, he was talking about his early days as a child actor. The next, he was tearing into agents, producers, casting directors, anybody who, in his mind, didn't earn their power. The switch was so sudden, the audience didn't know how to react. They laughed nervously at random moments, not because it was funny, but because they didn't know what else to do. Johnny kept smiling, but you could feel him calculating. How do I keep this watchable without turning it into a public meltdown? Blake kept charging forward like a train with no brakes. Then it escalated. He stood up, unprompted, waving his arms as he reenacted some chaotic story about a director. The camera operator scrambled to keep him in frame. Johnny motioned for him to sit. Blake didn't listen. Instead, he leaned across the desk, looming closer, pouring out messy emotional intensity that didn't feel scripted at all. It wasn't just anger, it was years of bitterness spilling out in a studio full of strangers. Johnny shot Ed McMahon that famous raised eyebrow look. We're losing control here. Ed didn't even step in. Just a tiny nod, like he already knew. Backstage, the crew whispered about whether they should cut to commercial early, but Johnny hated doing that unless it was absolutely necessary. So he tried every trick in the book: soft questions, small talk, a joke, a gentle redirect. Blake swatted them away, circling right back to grudges and half-remembered stories, looping through the same anger again and again. Finally, Johnny squeezed in a polite wrap-up and thanked him for coming. But Blake still wouldn't stop talking. The band started playing the commercial music. Johnny stood slowly, placed a steady hand on Blake's shoulder, and gave him that calm smile that said, without words, "We're done here." Blake finally caught on and shuffled off, still muttering under his breath. The audience applauded, but it wasn't the usual applause. It was that awkward, uncertain half applause people give when they're not sure if they should laugh or worry. And the moment the camera stopped, the mood turned ice cold. In the control room, producers panicked. Could they even use the footage for the West Coast feed? Was anything he said legally risky? Did he name names? People replayed the segment, sometimes with the sound muted, just watching the body language. Johnny leaning back in discomfort, Ed staring straight ahead, nervous laughter in the crowd. As soon as Blake left the building, Johnny's smile dropped. No jokes, no band banter, just a quiet, controlled anger. Then he said something to his producer that turned into policy within hours. Next time, we need to know what we're getting. If he's had anything to drink, we pass. A note went beside Blake's name on the booking sheet. Confirm our state before arrival. Check with publicist. If there's even a hint he's been at a bar, reschedule or cancel. It wasn't personal, it was survival, because Johnny Carson's empire was built on one thing above all else: control. And Robert Blake had proven that one drunk guest could turn that famous couch into a battlefield. Now there's only one part left, because when you look at all these moments together, you realize something chilling. Live television is never truly under control.